Welcome. So let's begin. We're going to meditate for one song. We're going to focus on the heart chakra. Sit up nice and straight. Let's begin. All right. So today we're going to continue on our lessons in Bodhicitta, in the yoga of compassion, with mind training. We're going to work on lesson number 6, the 6th step of the Lojong, which is the commitments of mind training. So the commitments of mind training are agreements that we make with ourselves, kind of a little pact we make with ourselves. We say, you know, this thing about compassion, this thing about cultivating compassion and the Dharma, it's good. And you know what? I'm going to honor this. I'm going to commit myself to these practices. So maintaining these commitments, developing commitment, this is the sixth point of mind training. So by doing this, we create a very strong capability, a facility within ourselves to be able to bring forth a greater light, a greater Dharma, to be able to assist people, help people in a positive way, relieve others from suffering. And in the process of doing this, being selfless. This is a yoga. This is something that brings, help and aid to others, but also enlightenment to us through this committed practice. Now, for a lot of people, commitment is like a bad word. It's like commitment. Oh my goodness. Commitment is like something that ties you down, something that defines you, something that is heavy. You're like, I don't want to get into that, all that commitment stuff. Commitment is good. So this one guy was like, he's like, so for the past 4 years at the weekly satsang, my guru has been telling me that I have a fear of commitment. And then his friend says to him, oh, who's your guru? And he goes, oh, he's Guru Swami Ananda. And then he goes, but he's really not my guru. He's just some guy who I see every week who tells me things. So people are very, when it comes to spiritual things or anything in life, sometimes afraid to commit. Because to commit means you take a definitive stance. If my guru's right, then what? Then my ego's wrong. Right? So the good thing about these commitments to mind training, to the Dharma, is that it's not attachment. So attachment is the kind of thing that we should fear. So if you have attachment, that's where you have ideas, concepts, feelings that get you all wound up in something. It limits awareness and it holds you down. So that's what attachment is. So attachment to anything is something that could cause limitation. And commitment is also not obligation. So when we think of commitment as, this big heavy thing, like, if I'm committed to it, then I have to do all these things. It's like a tax at that point, right? You're like, it's like I got to pay rent, utilities. It's like there's these things I need for my life, but it ends up being something that ends up being taxing and not something that's liberating. So attachment and obligation are kind of these heavy things, but commitment is not an attachment, and it's not an obligation. Commitment is always something that is empowering. It always lifts you up. It always brings you to a stronger, brighter place. This is spiritual commitment. So a few hundred years ago in Tibet, there were these 3 lay practitioners, and they were family men and they were merchants. They had large businesses, but they were also very committed to their cultivation of the Dharma. So one day, their teacher, their guru, he was a Rinpoche, he brought them together and he taught them about commitment. It's like, you have to be committed. And they were like, yeah, we're committed. And then they would go home and like, get into business or family matters, and then they would forget about their Dharma practice. Then they'd come back the next week and he's like, you have to be committed. And they're like, yeah, committed. And then he's like, okay. He's like, all right, I want you guys to set some time, next summer, and I'm going to give you a very special spiritual quest. So they say, okay. So they clear their schedules, set everything up with the family and the business so they have the time. And then the guru says, okay. He said, there's a special teaching. It's called a terma. And a terma is a hidden teaching. So in Tibet, like, some great enlightened beings would walk around and they would hide these enlightened teachings. They might hide it in a rock or in a cave or in a lake or something like that. So you would just be walking by and then you would discover this enlightened teaching. So this enlightened teaching was a scroll that Padmasambhava wrote. So he said, there's this special scroll that Padmasambhava wrote, and it's a terma, and it's hidden, at the foot of these three mountains, three holy mountains. And so you have to go to the three holy mountains, go to the foot of the mountain, and then you'll find it. Because if you're committed to this quest, you will find it. And then they say, wow, this is really great. So, they look at the map, they find this, nearby, there's these three mountain peaks. They go, that must be it, because, they're in the Himalayas, so there's a lot of mountains. But they're like, no, that one should be it. There's three mountain peaks right next to each other. So they go on this journey together. It takes them a couple weeks to get there. And they travel to this mountain, get to the mountain, to these three mountains. They look around, going around the foot of the mountain, all around the mountain, and they don't find it. And then they say, I guess this isn't the one. So they go to a nearby Buddhist temple, and then they start asking the Lama there, like, is this Padmasambhava teaching? And they go, oh, no, I don't think Padmasambhava ever came around these parts. And then they're like, And then the Lama goes, but further to the east, there's some mountains where there are three mountains that I know of that he has been to. So he shows them on the map, and that's like quite a journey. So they're heading back, and on the way to those other mountains, one of the laymen says, you know what? I'm really missing the family. I really was committed to this, but the wife, the kids, I gotta get back. So he says, okay, bye. And he goes back to the family. And then the other two continue on. They get to the mountains, and they go walking around the mountains, can't find it. And then they find a yogi in a little cave, and they ask him, hey, did Padmasambhava leave a terma here? And then he says, yes, but I already found it, and it's a different one than yours. And he says, but I did hear far to the east, there's these mountains that are called the three holy mountains. And maybe that's what your teacher was showing you, the three holy mountains of Padmasambhava. And he goes, oh, they go, really? We should have asked. So they find on the map, there's this place. It's very, very far east. It's actually kind of cutting over into China. And there's this one mountain with three peaks, and it's called the Three Holy Mountains. And it's a place where Padmasambhava was supposed to have been. So they go, that must be it. But this is like months of travel. So they start traveling, and then one of the merchant family men says, you know, I had scheduled a certain amount of time, but, you know, I'm worried about my business because, you know, my son took over and he doesn't know this and he doesn't know that. And if I don't go back, all these things are going to happen wrong. So he goes, okay, I got to go back to my business. And then the last one says, I'm going to stay committed to my practice, to this quest. Travels all the way across Tibet and goes to China. Goes to this mountain. And at the foot of the mountain, he finds the scroll. And there's a scroll. He opens it up, and it's this Padmasambhava Dharma teaching, and he gains this illumination. And then the scroll disappears magically, and he gains this like this illuminated power and awareness from that experience and that quest. So this is a story of attachment and obligation. The layman who was like, oh, got to go back to the family. Attachments. Got to go back to the business. Obligations. And the one who stayed committed was the one who went on a long journey, a journey further than he anticipated. But by staying committed, he was able to gain the special term of the secret teaching. So this is what we must do, because when we're committing to our spiritual practice, we have to go beyond attachments, and we have to go beyond senses of obligation to a deeper spiritual condition. And these are spiritual commitments are empowering commitments, and they're very healthy, wholesome, uplifting. They're things that we could all agree are very, very good, but people often find that it's very difficult to keep these commitments. Even though they can say, yeah, this is very, very, very good. And then they go, yeah, but I don't want to do it. So it's like things like exercise and a healthy diet. People say, yeah, that's a good idea, a great idea. And then they go, where's my Big Mac and my lazy boy? That's a big couch, an American couch, where the Americans sit and watch TV with their Big Mac. And so they go, yeah, these are really good things, but it's hard for people to keep those commitments. Or meditation and mindfulness, commitment to my yoga of compassion. It's like, yeah, these are really, really good things. Or, you know, like, oh, developing good career skills, right? These are good things. But people find it hard to maintain commitments to these very good, beneficial things. It's like one of my students came over to me and said, oh, wow, I found this website. And on this website, you know, you sign up and then it sends you every day like a little thought about the, you know, a reflection about the Lojong practices. Like, oh, you know, one of these slogans, aphorisms, here's some thoughts on it. Oh, remember today, you know, be mindful this way, be mindful that way, compassion this, bodhicitta that. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. I'm like, did you find it useful? And then he said, oh, I didn't sign up. He's like, there's a website that does it. I'm like, even if you know it's like a really good thing, you're just like, I don't know. Should I put my email address into it? That's such a big commitment. Right? So we have these things where even though we know it's a good thing, why is it that it's hard to like maintain commitments or establish committed practices that are healthy, wholesome, and enlightening? There are two principal considerations that hold someone back from keeping empowering commitments. And one is idealistic expectations. The other is conflicted concepts. So these are two things that really stop you from becoming committed to an empowering practice. And they're things that break the commitment to practice. However, if you learn about them, if you understand them, if you can face them directly, then they become lessons that create a stronger commitment to your enlightened practice. So the first one we'll talk about is the idealistic expectations. So we often, when we hear about something that's good, we often have these really great ideas about it. We say, wow, this is gonna be awesome. You know, like it's gonna work out so well. Like this is a good thing. There's this famous yogi in Tibet 1,000 years ago named Milarepa, and Milarepa wanted to, become enlightened. So he goes to this Buddhist monastery, and then the Lama of the monastery says, "Welcome." He goes, "Yes, just being here, enlightenment will sprout from you, and like everything's wonderful." So Milarepa just goes there, and he's like hanging out, and then the Lama's like, "Okay, we're gonna meditate, and we're gonna do this practice and that practice." Milarepa's just all, "It's okay. I'm just gonna wait here until enlightenment sprouts." He's like, "Where's my enlightenment? It should just happen, right?" So it's like you have different ideas of what practice is going to be. You come to the pathway to enlightenment, and then you say, "Oh, I'm going to just meditate and experience like bliss and insight and wisdom." And then the guru will, just give me tons of affirmation and praise. And you go, "With expectations this big, what could go wrong?" So very often people come with these grandiose ideas, and then they find that nothing can live up to your expectations. So when the self is making its grand ideas, nothing can live up to it. It's like there was this book, it's called Great Expectations. I read it, but it wasn't as good as I thought it would be. There's no way when you have your grand ideas, you're like, it must be this way. And then you go into it and you're like, whoa, it's really not that way. When you have expectations, you're fixing ideas, you're fixing constructs of rigid consciousness through the fluidity of being. And when you do that, then the fluidity of being becomes stuck. The flowing of life becomes congested. And then there's a kerfuffle in your consciousness. And it's like if you just go along with things as they are, as things come up, and you don't hold on to an idea or an expectation, then you can deal with life as it is. You can apply the teachings of the Dharma in a positive, constructive way. But if you say, wait, this shouldn't be this way, it should be this way, but it isn't, that's where you can find those expectations causing confusion. I remember there was a gal who went over to my teacher, and she said, "So I've been a student of yours for 4 years." And she said, "So when I became a student, I had a 3-year plan to become enlightened. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not enlightened, and I've been here for 4 years, so what's wrong?" And then he said, "Your plan." He said, "Forget the plan. He said, you need to practice the Dharma in whatever reality you find yourself in. Maybe it takes 3 years, maybe it takes 3 more years. But whatever reality that is exposed, that which arises in front of you is truth. Whatever plans you make or whatever expectations you have, those are false abstracts of limited consciousness. So very often we have a lot of confidence in ourselves. We're like, I'm really special and I'm smart, or something like that. And then when you bring the expectation of self-ability, then what you're bringing is a bunch of self. And even if you have a lot of self-ability, you're really smart, you're a good tap dancer, I don't know, whatever. When you do that, you're bringing self to enlightenment, which is the opposite of enlightenment. It's a great story. Some really talented, intelligent fellow goes to his teacher and says, how long will enlightenment take? And the teacher says, 10 years. And then he says, but I'm really smart. If I apply myself, I can learn everything. And then the teacher goes, 20 years. So when you have ideas of self-grandeur and ability, let those go. Because those are creating false awarenesses. They actually create a fog that overlays the truth. That's the self that comes over and thinks it's going to dominate enlightenment. So the self is, even if it's like you're really smart and you're really cool and everything like that, all of those things of what you think you can do, think your abilities are, these are creating improper expectations, because the self cannot make any progress towards enlightenment, because enlightenment is selflessness. It's the best. Now I see this a lot in martial arts. Someone comes in, they played football in high school or whatever, or think they've done something, they're fast or strong or something, and then they start doing martial arts. And then they do a few months, they get a yellow belt, and then they go, wow, this isn't what I thought it would be. Or maybe sometimes someone watches The Karate Kid and gets all inspired. I'm going to be the next Bruce Leroy. Mm-hmm. And they go, I'm going to do karate. And then they go in and, boy, it's like you fall into these structures of training that are actually very developmental, but it's not adding up to your ideas. You thought that you would come in and just be doing jumping, spinning hook kicks and beating Bruce Lee, right? So these are the expectations that someone could have that are not really realistic, but people have them. And they start off as maybe, we can say an inspiration. Inspirations are good, but if it becomes an expectation, you're setting yourself up for difficulty. And then after your yellow belt, you start to look around, you start to get a little bit more wise, a little bit more savvy to what it takes to develop yourself in martial arts, to develop that power and capability. And you say, whoa, there's actually a bit more work involved. We also see this in learning technology. So you might say, learning technology sounds like a good idea. Right now I don't have a very good job, or maybe I don't have a job. And if I learn to be a computer programmer, I can, get a good job, and I can make a lot of money, and I can work from home, and all these great benefits. You say, okay, how hard can it be? I'll give it a shot. And then you start doing it, and you're like, okay, this is a little hard. And then you get to JavaScript. And then you go, whoa, what's going on? It's hard to understand. This is difficult. And then you start to see that in learning computer programming, you're not just memorizing some things and doing things the way that you do things, right? You're actually learning to think differently, to be able to process information in different ways of structure that the tonal of your mind had never had before. So you actually start to develop a stronger awareness field of tonal, of processing information of life. And doing that, changing the way that you think, changing the way that you perceive information and process information, that actually takes some work. It's changing your mind and developing your mind. So it's something that, like, you hit your JavaScript and you're like, whoa, this isn't easy. Whoa, this is confusing. Whoa, how do I figure this out? There are ways. People do it. But at first you might say, wait, oh, I thought I was just going to learn, memorize some things and just do stuff. No. In martial arts, you transform yourself through the art. You gain power and awareness. In computer programming, you transform your mind, the way that you think and process information. These are transformative practices. And by doing that, it's not just going to be the way you think it is. So when people kind of go into martial arts or spirituality or computer programming, and then they get to the part where it's not working out the way I thought it would, that's when that's when, if you have expectations that you're attached to, these attached views of self that expect it should be like this and it should be like that, even though you were like, these are good ideas, then you start to say, I don't know if it's that good. I'm not sure I really like it anyway. Yeah, it was a good idea, but maybe it's not for me. That's where the flaw of the self comes in. That's where the commitment to mind training would bring you beyond that self to a greater level of personal power and spiritual awareness. So you have to keep going. You can't give up. You got to keep working. No matter what comes up in your development in martial arts, spiritual practice, and computer programming, you have to be committed to going further, committed to developing yourself. When you're committed to developing yourself, even if something really, really hard comes up, even if you fall down, then you get back up, dust yourself off, and keep going. Now, this is going to happen again and again and again. Either, whatever it is, if it's a martial arts class, if it's your meditation cushion, if it's, learning computer programming, you're going to fall down many times before you gain the strength to be able to stand. So it doesn't happen where you just automatically walk into a dojo and you're the best fighter. You have to develop yourself. It doesn't happen that you just sit down and meditate and stop thought completely and sit around in spiritual bliss at first. You've got to really go through the practice of silencing your thoughts, stilling the mind, controlling your focus. And in computer programming, you don't just sit down and go, oh, I learned Java at 4:30, and it was a little tricky, but it's okay now, right? No, these things take time to develop, usually. So when you start to do them, and you see that you fall down on your face, that's part of learning. And then you get back up, dust yourself off, and keep going. And if you do that again and again and again, then you'll find that you don't fall after a while. That you're strong. You're strong in your martial arts. You're strong in your meditation. You're strong in your computer programming. So don't give up. You got to keep going. It's these expectations that, oh, I'm going to come in and I'm just going to be fine with everything, great at everything. Those are false visions that set you up for a greater failure. If you were very sober about it, then you wouldn't be so upset when you fall down. So I used to know a Kung Fu master, and his students would ask him, how do you get good at Kung Fu? And then he would say, you train very hard for a long time. It's pretty simple, right? but it, you know, people came in and they're like watching like all this, like, you know, the spear and tiger fork and all Kung Fu and all this beautiful technique. Oh, wow, this is really beautiful. How do you get good at this? And it's like, you want to just jump in and like start learning it, right? But it takes a while to learn. It takes some time and also a lot of hard work. So this viewpoint of, you know, you have to train very hard for a long time is actually a very sober expectation. Yeah, I got my 3-year plan for enlightenment. Yeah, sober expectations. Yeah, so it's important to keep going. You know, a lot of Westerners are very, you know, excited about something, and so they push in a lot of effort for a little while, and then they go, didn't work. And you're never going to develop any, you know, competency of the inner arts by doing that. So it's like, you know, it's like, oh, I was really into karate, so I was doing it 5 days a week for 6 or 8 months. And so it's like, yeah, I really wanted to go for the black belt. I had these visions and inspirations. And then after a while, I stopped doing it. And if that's the level of commitment that you have to your training, you're never going to get a black belt. You're like, yeah, I was really into meditation. I did it for like, you know, 6 or 8 months every day. And then, you know, didn't work out. I kept thinking thoughts, got bored, so I stopped doing it, right? This yoga of compassion was cool until I stopped. Yoga's cool until I stopped. This is a very Western attitude. But a lot of people are like that in any kind of training. I trained really hard. I meditated for a week. Then I got bored of it. I was 110% until I was 0%. You're never going to develop yourself that way. So I was really learning computers every day until JavaScript, and then I stopped. Right? Then you're giving up. So my teacher used to say, this path that we're on and all the disciplines involved, you have to learn that this is a marathon and not a sprint, right? So if you sprint through a marathon, it'll look funny. You'll be at the marathon at the beginning, and then you'll sprint it out, running as fast as you can run, and you'll still be behind the Ethiopians. And then you'll get tired after 3 minutes, and then everybody else goes on for 26 miles, and then you just walk off and go, yeah, I ran a marathon once, 300 feet of one. So you have to be in for a long haul, right? You have to develop yourself. You know, Buddha always talked about developing yourself moderately. You develop yourself in a very constructive way, little by little, pragmatic. You know, it's like if you want to exercise, you go, yeah, I'm going to get into fitness. And then one day you go lift some weights, go running, you do some jumping jacks. And then the next day you're too sore to move. You're never going to get healthy. You're never going to develop yourself as a, you know, you're not going to get physically fit that way. Then you go, well, okay, I couldn't move, and then I was bored of it for 2 weeks, and then I decided to go back into it, and then running and lifting weights and jumping jacks, and then the next day, oh, I was too sore, right? That's an improper way to develop yourself. So you have to develop yourself little by little. This is a marathon and not a sprint. So on the pathway to enlightenment, you can't fake it. You have to do it. You have to be real. There's no like pretending. I'm pretending I'm enlightened. I'm pretending I'm humble, kind of thing like that. No, this is all about what's deep down inside, and you can't fake it. You have to do it for real. You can't fake stopping thought. So you have to learn how to do it step by step for real. You can't skip any steps. You can go through them quickly if you have the right, focus, the right attitude, no expectations. But you have to do it for real. And you can't cheat enlightenment. You can't cheat karma. You can go beyond karma, but you can't cheat your enlightenment. So you can't fake it, and you can't cheat. You gotta do it right. And you have to be willing to go through whatever it takes to go through it. You gotta be willing to take whatever it takes and to stay committed to the discipline, because that's the way that you can achieve it. So in Kung Fu, we had this term, Chiku, and Chiku means eat bitter. Doesn't that sound great? So, so eating bitter, if you're doing a difficult exercise, like this horse riding stance, you're just standing in this stance. It takes a lot of endurance. It's very difficult to stand for an hour in the horse riding stance. And so you would have to do this thing, chiku, eat bitter. And it means to endure something that's difficult, endure hardship towards a goal that's empowering, but to endure it with a positive mind, to realize that by enduring some difficulty, that you're actually achieving the empowering goal that you seek. So it's a very, very good thing. And it's what we really need to do in all of the disciplines of martial arts, learning technology, being committed to our practice of cultivation of the Dharma and of the commitments of mind training. We need to be able to eat bitter, which is to endure whatever comes up that's hard, to stay on the practice and the goal and develop ourselves. So you got to be able to deal with hardship. You have to be able to take pain and understand that by taking the pain that is inherent in life, the hardship that comes up in any endeavor, that you actually are able to make progress towards the success and mastery of that endeavor, of that yoga, of that martial art, of that meditation, of learning tech, of all the things that you want to do. You're going to have to be able to chiku, which is eat bitter. And then when you can go through the hardships, then you can have great success. So there's a nice story of this actor and writer, director, and producer. His name is Tyler Perry, African American. And as a young boy, he really wanted to go into show business. He wanted to be an actor. And then in high school, he started even like writing plays and things like that. So he was really, really into this. Now, he had a tough life, inner city, high school, African American. And he was like around all these, like, all around all this violence and poverty and things like that. But he would just sit there and like write his plays. And he got kicked out of high school because he wasn't focusing on his classes. He was focusing on his plays. He eventually got back in, but he was like struggling in his life. But he had this dream, right? And then after school, he really went into learning acting. After high school, he went into learning acting, and then he created a play. He wrote a play, and he was like, "Yeah, this is my dream. I'm gonna do this." And he's like, "I've had all this hardship. I've been focusing on this the whole time." And then he, opening night of his play, he books this big theater, spends all of his money on it, and like 12 of his friends show up, and one of his cousins. And the play completely bombed. It did horrible, but he believed in it. So he kept on working odd jobs, raising the money so that the next year he could release the play again. So he did, and then it bombed again. And then he did this year after year. And then on the 7th year, something happened. There was a large group of people who came to the play, and they loved it. They talked about it, and then the play grew. So instead of it failing on opening night and there not being enough money to continue, he was able to grow the play, and then he got a lot of local notoriety, and then very quickly he grew to be a movie star, a writer, director, producer, and then I think it was in 2012, at the height of his career, he was the highest paid man in entertainment throughout the country. So he was very, very, very successful. And he had to go through a lot of hardship, 7 years trying to get this one play off the ground and working whatever job he could to finance it himself. And then once that play took off, then his career took off. So you got to go through the hard things that you got to go through. If your expectation is, I wrote this play, it's going to take off the day it opens, then I'll be in Hollywood the next day, right? Then that's an unrealistic expectation. So the idea is, it's not to lower your expectations, because if you have low expectations, then you don't esteem to something great. You'll be like, I would like enlightenment, but it doesn't really have to be enlightenment. And it doesn't have to come soon. It could come whenever, It doesn't have to be enlightenment. It could just be, a ham sandwich instead. So it's like, if you start lowering expectations, then you're actually just bringing yourself down to wanting less. Yeah, I've heard that before. The secret to happiness in life is low expectations. That's not true. Because then you're just like, oh, life is, because those are concepts that life isn't so good. So if you have good concepts like, wow, I'm going to be enlightened, I'm going to get a black belt, I'll be a computer programmer, those are higher things to esteem too. But the idea is not to lower your expectations, but to get rid of expectations and just to accept what occurs and practice with commitment to the arts that you're developing, the skills that you're developing, the spiritual practice that you're developing. Develop yourself. Stay committed to the success of the task, the success of the art. Commitment to mind training. So the second consideration of commitment, that which blocks it and that which can yield greater commitment, is conflicting concepts, right? So if you're engaging in something and you have two separate ideas about it, you're like, oh yeah, I want this, but I also don't want this, then you can't commit to it. And a lot of people do this. They're very attracted by something, but they're also very upset by it. And a lot of people go through their lives, they're just not straight in their mind and not straight in their heart about what's going on and what they're doing. A lot of people, go to school, hate school, go to work, hate work, and the thing that they're engaging with in their lives, they're not clear on it. And so they have conflicting ideas, and then you're never going to be successful, you're never going to be committed, you're never going to be happy when you have conflicting ideas. So you got to get straight in your mind and in your heart with these conflicting ideas. If you have conflicting ideas or conflicting conflicts, you'll always be in a condition of spiritual confusion, and you'll never be able to have a commitment to spiritual training because you'll be conflicted by it. So these conflicts, they create separation. So the whole practice of enlightenment is to say, okay, how do these things come together? Not that one idea and the conflict are separate, but that one idea and the conflict don't exist. So you got to get to this place where there's no conflicted ideas, no conflicting concepts. So like, let's say that you have a friend who, says, hey, you know what? I get up every day at 5:30 in the morning and I go to this boot camp where we go running around in the park and we exercise. And you're like, wow, that sounds really good. And you're like, and then your friend is like, yeah, so the personal trainer who runs the boot camp, is really helpful, really motivates you. And then you say, I don't like personal trainers. They're torturers. They make you do lots of push-ups. They tell you push harder, things like that. So if you have this weird idea that I don't like personal trainers, they push me too hard, I don't like being pushed, but I also like this idea of getting up early and doing exercise, then what's going to happen is you'll go to that boot camp, you'll do a little bit, you'll be mad at the trainer, and then you won't keep going back. You'll be like, I like it, but I don't like it, right? There's a conflict, and so you can't get the benefit of the program because you're conflicted about it. Or let's say you go to your doctor and your doctor says, you should go on a diet. You're putting on too much weight. And then you're conflicted about it. You're like, I should listen to my doctor, but I really like cake. So you go, my doctor said I was getting fat. So I went to my baker for a second opinion. My baker put me on this vitamin C diet, cake 5 days a week, 5 times a day. And then anything you want on the weekends. So, when you have conflicts, they could be unhealthy or ways that you actually don't develop yourself. So I remember there was a student of my teacher, and he learned computer programming and became a good computer programmer. But he had a conflict. His father ran an import-export business. So he grew up with his father running this business. And his father used to always say, son, you got to run your own business because be your own man and no one else is going to tell you what to do, things like that. So he's like, he was a computer programmer and he was a good one, but he always had conflict on his jobs with his boss. And he was asking an older student in the school about how to deal with conflict. He's like, oh, my bosses, they're always mean. My bosses always do this. I don't like my boss because my boss tells me what to do. All the time, they just came up in his work. And then the senior monk of the school said, I think I understand. He's like, you know, also my father ran a construction equipment business. And he also told me, you know, got to run your own business, son. And then this older student learned the yoga of computer programming and then did it. And he saw the same conflict in his own mind. But he said, you know, here's what I realized. My father wasn't very happy. And he said, my father was very stressed out and very angry. And my father had a heart attack. And then this younger student was like, oh my gosh. He's like, my father was very stressed out, very angry, and he also had a heart attack. So they were able, or the new student was able to see that even though he had these ideas and concepts that his father had instilled in him, that while he was working, all it did was conflict him in his job. So once he realized that these concepts that he got from his father weren't so good, then he went back to work and he had no problem with his managers or bosses at that point any further. He was totally happy. So when we have these conflicting ideas, they can really undermine our work and our development and our spiritual progress. So on the pathway to enlightenment, we often get these wonderful like Hallmark card views of liberation. Now, some of you probably don't know what a Hallmark card is. It's very American. It's like a greeting card, but for all sorts of different occasions. And on the Hallmark card, it's the brand, the Hallmark card will have a nice little message that's written. So, you know, instead of you having to write, hey, Dad, thanks for this and that, and here's my message to you on your birthday or Father's Day or whatever, you just get the Hallmark card and it says something nice. You go, here you go, Dad. It just makes it a lot easier, right? It's the American way. So, you know, you can get that Father's Day card and it says, a good father knows when to speak and knows when to listen. Dad, you've told me so many amazing things. I've heard them and grown, and now you need to listen, Dad. And what I have to say is, you're a great dad. You know, so they'd have little messages like that. So you don't have to write anything that you feel. The Hallmark card says it all. So you have these Hallmark card visions of enlightenment. Enlightenment is, I'm all happy and jolly, and screw everybody else. Oh, wait, whatever. Whatever you think, right? You have these ideas. Oh yeah, but Hallmark cards are also great because they have one for every occasion. So this guy walks into a Hallmark card shop and he goes, and he picks up a card, he's looking at it. Then he asks the lady behind the register, what's your return policy? And she says, 30 days exchange. And then he's like, okay, I'll buy this. So he gets this get well soon card, goes away. 2.5 weeks later, he comes back. He says, can I exchange this get well soon card for my condolences card? I'm sorry for your loss. So any occasion, and if you time it right, you just have to buy one, keep returning them. So, but people really, start off with very simple ideas and views of what enlightenment is. And then when something comes up that conflicts with your view, then it's something that causes trouble. Now, we see this as a bad thing, but you got to see it as a good thing. Let me tell you a story of Master Fang. Master Feng was a great Zen master long ago in China. Now, this very accomplished monk from another monastery came to seek him to learn about enlightenment because he had studied many of the Buddhist teachings and he wanted to learn more from this great master. So he shows up and he says, "Let me tell you what I have learned about the Buddha Dharma." And he starts, talking about all these amazing teachings that he had learned and read and his ideas and all these things. And then he says, "So, Master Feng, what can you tell me to help me be enlightened? Tell me of the Buddha Dharma." And then Master Feng says to him, "Buddha was a bull-headed jail keeper." And then he walks away. And then the monk is like, "Oh, Buddha's good. Why did you say he's a bull-headed jail keeper? I'm very confused. So confused." And then he goes back to Master Feng and says, "Here's another beautiful teaching of Dharma of the Buddha." And then Master Feng goes, "Buddha was a horse-faced old maid." And then he's like, and then he walks away, and the guy's like, and then he comes back with the most amazing teaching that Buddha ever gave. And then Master Feng goes like this, like he's behind bars. "Jail keeper." And then this monk goes by himself and he's like, "What is wrong?" He's like, "I'm so upset. I'm so angry. This, I know I've been training in Buddhism for 20 years myself. And I've learned this and this, and this is right, and this is right, and this is right. And Master Feng is just wrong. He's wrong and he's bad. There's something wrong here." And then he came up with a teaching from the Buddha. And he's like, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to quit. And I'm going to tell Master Feng why. And it's going to be a Buddha teaching. And so that's it. I know it's true." And so he came up with some teaching, like Buddha said, "Oh yeah, if you can't find a Dharma ally to walk on the path with, and leave and walk alone," right? So he's like, "Oh God, I got this whole story and this whole teaching." Then he walks over to Master Feng and he's all, "Master Feng." Then Master Feng goes like this. And then he goes, "Oh," and he realizes something. He realizes that Master Feng was showing him that he was imprisoned by concepts of the Buddhist teaching. It wasn't that the Buddha was a bad guy. It's that his concepts imprisoned him. His concepts of the Buddha was a bad guy for him. And so realizing this, being confronted by Master Feng, showing him a conflicting idea to his beautiful, amazing Dharma ideas, it got him to push through a place where he was stuck, and he had Satori, enlightened realization. Poof. So this is what we got to do. And this is what often happens on the spiritual path. You come with an idea, you learn something that shatters that idea so that you can have a bigger vision. And so it's very necessary, because if you just stay with whatever you read in a book or whatever your Hallmark card vision is, then you won't have a realization. You'll be stuck in ideas, stuck in concepts. So very often on the path, when things happen in a way that you don't like it, goes against what you thought, then you need to open your mind and open your heart and understand that this thing that's a difficulty for you turns out to be a grace for liberation. We're like oysters. Buddhists are like oysters. Tasty, No, no, stop that. Buddhists are like oysters. So there's an oyster sitting, in the ocean, and then a little grain of sand somehow gets into the shell, and then the oyster is like, very bothered by the sand. It's very bothersome. So I'm gonna like deal with this little bothersome sand. And what happens over time is that little grain of sand becomes a beautiful pearl. So when we're bothered by something on the path comes up, it bothers us. It gives us a chance to transform it into a pearl of wisdom. So Buddhists are like oysters. So there's Eli Lilly, big pharmaceutical company in the United States. They're working on a vaccine. And they've been watching their development over the past 16, 18 years, something like that, through the maturement methodology, making sure that the way that they develop their processes are maturing and becoming stronger and more focused. So they were looking at a lot of matrices, right, across this Six Sigma process development. And so they realized something. They said, hey, when we do these tests or, like pharmaceutical exams and things like that, they say, when we have everybody on the team, all the scientists agreeing, then we have okay results. But when we have the scientists on the team disagreeing with how to do things, then in the end, we have much better results. So they were able to look at the maturity and quality of their projects over time. And where there was conflict, they ended up getting stronger results. See, they're like oysters that way too. Yeah, so it's very important. When we face times where we have concepts, not to be so fixed on our concepts. And when we have conflicting concepts, that we open our mind to see things in a bigger way that accepts both for a greater realization. Now, this brings you through these two things that are blockers, the expectations and the conflicts of concepts. It brings you beyond that so that you can truly be committed in a higher awareness to your cultivation of the Dharma, a greater commitment to your spiritual practice, to the practice of martial arts, learning computer programming, meditation, and also the Lojong, mind training, compassion, and Bodhicitta. So this is very good. And when you do good commitment, that's powerful. When you have strong commitment to enlightenment, it's extremely powerful. You can get past any barrier. I remember a good story about commitment in business. There was a company called Stitch Fix. Some of you know it. So Stitch Fix has a fashion designer who will give customers online a survey of what their interests are in their fashion, and then the fashion designer ships them clothes. And then if the fashion designer is good, which this is a multi-billion-dollar business, the fashion designer is good, people like the clothes, keep them, pay for them. Otherwise, you can send it back. So in 2009, Stitch Fix was just starting off. They were 6 or 8 months into their business model, and they were, running in the red. They had a lot of things that they needed in order to really take the business off to achieve their revenue models. So they decided to go down to Palo Alto and Sand Hill Road, where there's all these venture capital firms, and they said, we need to raise, millions of dollars so that we can achieve this business model. So they went down and, I think they saw 63, 64 venture capitals and said, here's our pitch. This is who we are. This is what we're trying to do. And these are our goals over the next year. And every single one of those firms said, no, we're not going to give it to you. Now, 2009 was a tough time to ask for money as well, because it was, the Great Recession. So it was a difficult time, but they got no interest. Now, a dozen of the firms said, come check with us again in 6 months. So 6 months later, they came back, gave the same pitch, right? And then the most of the firms were like, oh, interesting. So the thing that they were interested in is that when they had come before, they said, oh, you planned to do this in the next year and you're halfway there. So you actually started to do, or you actually did what you said you were going to do. And then they said, that's very interesting. Okay, come back in 3 months. And I said, okay. They come back in 3 months and they watched. They said, wow, since day one, you said you were going to do this, and now you're like mostly there. Come back in another 3 months. So they said, okay, wow, what you said you were going to complete in your year, you actually completed. You were consistent in following through with your model. So then they said, come back in 3 months. And they came back in 3 months, and then they got a $6 million round from one of the venture firms because they were consistent. When you're consistent, you prove something to yourself and you gain personal power. And also, if you need to prove yourself to others, consistency proves things to others as well. So we always want to be consistent. Observe your consistency and you observe great personal power. Consistent meditation, consistent Bodhicitta, consistent martial arts practice, consistency in developing yourself and your job skills. This gives you personal power. So be consistent. If you lack consistency, then you're powerless. Like, you guys all know about Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Well, Michael Jordan and Lawrence Armstrong, they were both trying to get into the varsity basketball team at their high school. And they both were not picked for the team. Now, they decided, they were friends, they said, you know what, we're gonna get up early in the morning, we're gonna train together, we're gonna really work on developing our basketball skills so that we can get onto the varsity team. So they did. They woke up early in the morning, they trained, they ran the baskets and everything, and after 10 days, Lawrence Armstrong quit. But Michael Jordan didn't. And Michael Jordan became this famous basketball player eventually, and Lawrence Armstrong became unknown. Without consistency, you don't develop power. Consistency is really drawing a line in the sand and saying, I'm committed to this, I'm doing this. Because greatness comes from making that decision. Not just, I'm sort of committed, because sort of committed is not commitment. If you say, I'm going to learn computer programming and I'm going to succeed in this career path, that's it. That's what I'm doing. Then whatever it takes, whatever ups and downs you face, you'll get through it. If you say, oh, I'm gonna learn to meditate, and then you'll say, okay, I'm gonna to meditate, I got to sit down twice a day, and I don't know if it's going to be easy or hard, but I'm committed to learning it. This is the way that you're going to succeed. You have to make a decision. That's what a commitment is. Making a decision to succeed. It's like in Tibet, they have these, it's called the Tibetan snowfinch. It's a little bird, and it lives on these steep mountains and cliff sides. It nests there. So then, this little bird pops out of an egg and says, "Oh, okay, great." And then then it sits there, mother feeds it, it develops its wings, and then someday it's time for it to fly. So it looks down, long drop, and at some point, this bird has to commit to flying. So it jumps out, flaps its wings, and it commits to flying, and then guess what? Splat! It flies. All right, so, but this is also what Buddha did. Buddha said, he said, I'm going to sit under this tree until I'm enlightened. That's it. I'm committing myself to attaining liberation. So I'm not going to sit for a while, give it a shot, see what happens, then get pissed off and leave, right? It's like, I'm going to sit, I'm committing myself to enlightenment. And this is what we need to do. We need to be committed. Now, here's what happens. Once you start to commit yourself and you start to see success and you start to go, yeah, this is working really good. Oh, I'm so happy. Then the ego starts to blossom. And then you go, I did this, right? And then we have a beautiful Lojong teaching. And it is a teaching that helps you to let go of that ego that develops as you develop yourself. And it also is the trick, the secret to overcoming the traps of idealistic, ideas, idealistic ideas, concepts, conflicting concepts. So it is the way to get beyond all these conflicts of practice that stop you from commitment. And it is also the way that helps you to be selfless in your practice, even when you start to experience the amazing, powerful results of strong practice. And this is a slogan, and the slogan is, change your attitude, but be natural. That's it. Change your attitude, but be natural. And this means that everything that you were doing before was for you, and that you need to change the way that you're looking at things, calibrate yourself in a different way. Instead of doing it for you, do it for others. And if you can do that, then all of the personal confusions go away. And the expectations dissolve. The conflicts dissolve. You can do your practices very clearly because you're not doing it for you anymore. When you have expectations, it's all about the self. You're like, oh, I expected this and it didn't happen, so now I don't like it. That's all about the self. If you are doing something for someone else, these big snags of self don't come up. You're like, just a simple thing. It's like, whoa, I got to get a job. I have to have a career. I have a family or something, right? So I got to do this for my family. So if you're doing it for your family, you're not just doing it for yourself. And then you're able to get a lot more power. It's a selfless act. But if it's just for you, you're all, no, I think I'd rather sit around and play video games and Snapchat or whatever, right? So you have to get past the self. And when you can align your spiritual disciplines with selfless acts for others, or a selfless motivation for others, then a lot of things that would snag the ego disappear. So it's brilliant that way. And then at the same time, as you start to get your black belt and your great computer programming job and things like that. And even when your meditation gets good, it also cuts down the ego. And this is the part of it. Act natural. So change your attitude. Don't do everything for yourself. Actually learn to do everything for others. And be natural. Being natural means that you're not demonstrating yourself as the way, you know. So you're not cultivating egotism in your practice as well. So there's a really good example of this. There was a woman named Ella Baker, and she was born in the early 1900s in Norfolk, Virginia, and she was African American. So she grew up with her grandmother, and her grandmother was a former slave, and her grandmother started to tell her all the horrible stories about being a slave and all this difficult stuff that was happening to Black folk. So she was like looking around going, whoa, there's a lot of injustice. And as you know, she got older, she said, you know what? I want to fight against that. I want to help, you know, African Americans. So her motivation was not for herself, it was to help others. So she said, you know, in order to help others, I need to get a degree from a university. No one in her family had ever done that. And it didn't seem like a possibility for her. Back in that time, for an African American woman, you know, from a poor background, it didn't seem like much of a possibility, but she fought for it. She worked really hard. You know, she got into a university. Wasn't easy. It was very difficult. She had to work at the same time, put herself through school. You know, book learning wasn't easy for her, but she did everything right. She graduated, got her degree. Now, she said, you know, if it was just for herself, she wouldn't have gotten a degree. But she went through all that education because she knew that she had to do that to be significant in her giving to African Americans, in her quest to create a better condition for others. So she did the work that she had to do, and then she started to, you know, she joined. From having that degree, she got an editing job at a Black newspaper in New York City, and then she started from that making additional connections. So she ended up joining the NAACP and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And then in that organization, she worked her way up and she became the highest level, most powerful woman in NAACP. And then she continued working there. And then she was at this Southern Leadership Conference, I think in Atlanta. And there she was networking with these people, and that's where she was one of the primary members. But she was one of the founders of SNCC, which I've talked about before, the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee. And so she was essential in the creation of that. And then this was, you know, the organization that worked with John Lewis and the Freedom Riders, and was a very, very powerful movement in civil rights. So she did all of this as a selfless giving. She was doing all of this not for herself, but for others. And she was able to overcome a lot of personal barriers and to push her career and her success and her power to a high level, because it wasn't about her. It was about helping others. And she did it in a really beautiful way, because she was very focused on not promoting herself, but promoting others. So she said that this work that that everyone was doing, NAACP, SNCC, everybody. She said, this shouldn't be a movement that creates success for a leader. She was a little critical of Martin Luther King. And she would tell him, like they knew each other. And she's like, you better settle down. Because he's all, oh, I got a dream. She's all. So she would say, yeah, this isn't about a charismatic leader. And this isn't about, there were a lot of Southern churches that were, promoting whatever they wanted to promote. Of course, helping people, but they also had, their own personal interests. And she was like, no, it's not about a leader. If a leader's good, they promote the success of the movement. And that's what she believed in and fought for. So she was like always against charismatic leaders, always against bureaucracy, and was always like focused on empowering people. So she was both selfless and committed in a selfless way. So she changed her attitude from self to selfless, and then she acted natural. And that means not self-promoting. Look what I did. I started this organization, that kind of thing. She was always really grassroots, promoting the people. So she was a very good example of this slogan. And it's something that we need to aspire to be committed to developing ourselves. But really, you gotta find a reason to develop yourself more than just you. If you develop yourself in martial arts, meditation and enlightenment, and your career, then you're a powerful and capable vessel of bringing compassion and enlightened structures for others. So that's a good way of looking at it. And of course, you can't be self-promoting and you can't be like, oh, I'm so wonderful, because then that would be, while you're developing all these great qualities, you're slashing yourself down at the center, which is creating egotism. So commitment to mind training is to focus on your meditation, to focus on all the teachings of compassion, to focus on developing your personal power, focus on your job yoga, your karma yoga, developing yourself in all of the ways of the pathway to enlightenment. To never give up, overcome whatever gets in your way. When something looks like it's an obstacle in your mind, in your heart, in your awareness, or in the physical, then stay committed. And the thing that seems like it's an obstacle, your mind will grow, your heart will grow, and you'll see that that is not an obstacle, that it is actually a catalyst for enlightenment. All right, so I'd like to conclude with meditation, soft focus on the third eye. Sit nice and straight, and let's begin. Very nice. Thank you all very much.